Canadians have long believed that freedom of speech is a fundamental right. There seems to be a growing threat to freedom of expression on university and college campuses. Joining me now to chat about this a little bit more is James Kitchen, a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me via Skype from Calgary. James, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Now, can you first of all explain to our viewers what the Campus Freedom Index is all about?
It's a report on the state of free speech generally across the country at universities, but it also contains a detailed report on each public university across the country, of which there's 61. And we give a grade to each university on their policies and on their actions, and also to the student unions as well. So it's an excellent tool. For example, if you're a student or a parent and free speech on campus is something that's really important to you, then you can go and look up your specific university that you're considering about and see where they stand on free speech.
So viewers can read about the whole Campus Freedom Index on your website, but how can you really get into detail about how some of the results are measured?
So there is a website dedicated to the Campus Freedom Index. I think it's campusfreedomindex.ca. And on there's a whole tab dedicated to our methodology. Right, so you can see the criteria that we grade each university on, and how we arrive at the grades. We give a letter grade, A down to F, right, just like you would get if you were at university, right? And if you're really good on free speech, you get an A. And if you censored something that year, you're going to get an F.
Now, 61 campuses, as you mentioned, were graded, out of which only 8 A's were given out. Are you guys being a little tough here on the post-secondary institutions, or are we seeing policies that maybe are infringing on people's freedoms?
I wouldn't say we're being tough. I would say that that's just a reflection of the poor state of free speech on Canadian campuses, right? If we gave 0 A's, I would say we're probably being a little tough. But those that get A's have earned them, right? University of Lethbridge is a good example. It's one of the best every year consistently. Its policies are good, and they almost always follow through on those policies and uphold free speech. There's a lot of universities that have good sounding policies, like the University of Toronto, for example. They don't follow through on them. Right, so they never get a really good grade. Because in order to get an A, you got to get an A in your policies and both in your actions each individual year, right? So it's just there's a lot of campuses that don't have good policies, and they censor more often than not, and so they're going to get poor grades.
Why do you think it is that some post-secondary institutions are not committing themselves to upholding our freedom of expression, which is a pretty important right here?
Well, I think a lot of universities have lost their way. Right, their whole modus operandi is the search for truth, academic inquiry, free thought, free exploration of ideas, the consideration of all ideas, no matter how unpopular or dissident. At least that's what the university was founded on, right, for hundreds of years. But universities have lost their way, right? They have a very Marxist worldview about them, and Marxism is opposed to that, on a philosophical level, and that's pervaded most universities, right? So. That's just what's happened over the last few decades. They've lost that, and they've strayed into it's all about social justice now, right? Which is not commensurate with free speech. So naturally, we have more censorship than not, because that's a reflection of the ultimate worldview that's shared by these universities' administrations.
Do you think we're seeing a bit of a cancel culture making its way into universities?
I think we're seeing a lot more than a bit. I think cancel culture is something. Actually, I think campuses are ground zero for cancel culture. I think that's where it started. That's where it was born over the last 2 decades, and it's now spreading like a virus, I would say, to the rest of society. Right? It's spreading into the workplace. It's spreading into government offices. It's like a cancer. That is destroying the culture of free speech that a society needs in order to remain free and democratic, right? These institutions are not free and democratic, right? I mean, you say something the wrong way over there, and you lose your job, whether you're a professor, whether you're a non-professor staff. You get academic discipline if you're a student. It's horrendous what happens to these people if they don't speak the orthodoxy when they're on campus.
So in your opinion, how can students and maybe parents of students fight back?
Well, I guess the first thing is to get informed, right? I mean, this is a serious problem that I don't think a lot of people are really aware of until it happens to them, right? They're not really aware of it in general. I mean, most people don't I don't think most people think about the free speech situation on a campus before they choose it as the place that they're going to spend 50 grand on and 4 years at, right? That needs to be, if you start making that a criteria, right? I mean, universities are going to essentially give students what they want. If you want this cuddly little place where you don't have to see or listen to anything you don't like, if enough students want that, that's what they're going to get. That's what the university is going to give them. So if students and parents start demanding that free speech is a critical part of their education, then maybe the universities will respond a little bit. That's probably the first place to start.
Now let's circle back to the University of Lethbridge, James, for just a moment here. It received an A grade, but the A grade was given for the university's policies and practices, and only a C was given for the U of L's student union's policies and practices. Why the discrepancy there?
Well, that's not uncommon. Student unions tend to be even worse than universities, right? Because they're run by students, right? And a lot of students these days are very, very progressive, socially, politically, in their worldview, which they buy into a lot of the Marxist narrative and the social justice narrative, and of course, within that narrative, within that worldview, there's very little tolerance for dissident or unpopular expression or uncomfortable expression, right? There can't be anything other than the orthodox view, and anything to do with sexuality or gender or race or historical oppression or anything like that. Climate change. Litany of issues, right? And it tends to be the more progressive students that want to get into student government, right? The whole change the world kind of thing, and the business students who maybe take a more progressive or more conservative outlook on the world, they're not the ones that are running to run the campus, right? To run the student union. So generally, their policies are terrible because it's all social justice oriented type policies, and they don't tolerate dissent. They don't tolerate different opinions, right? If there's some conservative student that's saying something they don't like, that maybe questions BLM, for example, they want to shut that down, right? So very few student unions in the country, regardless of how good the university is, are good on free speech. It's not there.
James, let's also consider the increase of universities who received failing grades. Many of these universities, while publicly defending freedom of expression when pushed, they'd rather censor or cancel, leading to that cancel culture we were just discussing, events that they deem politically incorrect. What are your thoughts?
I think sometimes that's a reflection of the personal political views of the administration. Sometimes, but I think a lot of other times it's that the universities are not necessarily politically motivated. I think they're quite apolitical, but they're just very scared. They're not willing to take the risk and use the resources to defend free speech. So one of the most common examples that we see from the administration will say, well, there's a security threat, right? Antifa is going to come and pull the fire alarm or protest or smash windows or threaten people or push people, and we don't want to deal with that. So because of that, we're not going to allow this to go ahead. That's the most common excuse, right? Which isn't so much that the university is necessarily faving censorship. They don't want to see that happen, right? They don't want to see all this violence. They'd like people just be able to talk and it be civil, right? But when push comes to shove, there's a lot of universities that aren't willing to take a stance and say, you know what? Yes, this is going to cost us some money and security, but we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to defend free speech, and we're going to get security there, and we're going to protect people's ability to talk. We're not going to let people throw things and ring the cowbells and pull the fire alarms. We're going to do the right thing. Most universities they're not committed enough to free speech to make that expense.
Now, James, let's chat a bit about Jessica Yaniv, a transgender activist who until recently had filed numerous human rights complaints. Can you share a little bit of backstory and the outcome of these complaints?
So the backstory is that Jessica filed several human rights complaints against several aestheticians who specialize in body waxing, right? Specifically, what Jessica wanted was the waxing of the groin genital area, right? Which is a very specialized procedure. And these women, many of which are immigrant women and have, very important religious and cultural beliefs about being around a person with male genitalia. So they refused. And so on that basis, Jessica filed a complaint claiming gender identity and gender expression. So ultimately, those complaints were not upheld, and the complainants, or sorry, the respondents, the statisticians, they won basically. That's what the outcome of that was. A few more complaints were filed afterwards. Those were eventually dropped. So at this point right now, all the aestheticians who were looking at trouble with the Human Rights Commission have won, and they're able to continue on, and they've not been penalized, and we consider that the proper outcome.
Have some of the complainants maybe taken it upon themselves to maybe sue Jessica now, saying you put our business, you put us through a lot of trauma and stress, and now we need to be compensated for this?
It was traumatizing for some of them, right? To go through this experience. Jessica did end up paying costs. It's unusual, but sometimes the Human Rights Commission will award costs when complainants cause a lot of trouble, as Jessica did. And so some costs were paid by Jessica and were received by the complainants.
Do we know how much?
Or sorry, by the respondents. I believe the amount was $6,000.
Okay. Now, is there anything, James, that can be done to prevent individuals from continuously launching what appears to be frivolous human rights complaints? I mean, many times these complaints make life very difficult for people you just talked about who are simply trying to earn an honest living.
It's a serious problem. There is, I mean, one of the deterrents, right, is the costs, right? Costs are used by whether it's courts or tribunals to deter those sorts of frivolous complaints, right? So Jessica's aware that if more frivolous complaints come in, there's going to be cost consequences. Eventually, I think there is a process by which we could petition the tribunal to declare Jessica as a vexatious complainant, and in that case, there'd be a further barrier to Jessica filing further complaints. And I mean, I'd like to see that happen if this continues. At this point, there's no pending complaints. They've all been withdrawn.
The Justice Centre has also issued a legal warning to Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro on behalf of a Calgary businesswoman who's prohibited from leaving her home even to walk her dog. What is this case all about?
So that's to do with the mandatory universal quarantine. Right. And what I mean by universal is that regardless of symptoms, regardless of negative test results, these quarantine measures are in place. Right. Which in our perspective is overbroad. Right. It does make sense so far as it goes to quarantine someone who is experiencing symptoms or has tested positive. But beyond that, it's a serious rights infringement. Right. I mean, it's essentially house arrest. Right. To be stuck at home. That's a penal sanction. Right, and people should not be incurring that unless there's actually at least some evidence that they may be actually infected. If there's no symptoms and there's a negative test result, it doesn't make any sense, and so it's a rights violation that doesn't have anything to justify it. So in that specific case, we had gone to court this last Friday to get an injunction. We were not successful, although we felt that it was a good case. It was worth the time. The judge was very receptive. And this is something we're probably going to continue to explore because these quarantines of massive numbers of healthy people has to come to an end.
Now, the City of Edmonton has outfitted the high-level bridge with 60,000 programmable lights through the Light the Bridge program. James, the City of Edmonton invites members of the public and community groups to request the bridge be lit up in specific colors to reflect basically their event, cause, or campaign. Now, in 2019, the Alberta March for Life Association applied to the City of Edmonton to have the bridge lit up in the colors of pink, blue, and white, and the application was approved by the city, but then later cancelled due to the polarizing nature of the subject matter. Can you explain how the Justice Centre is moving on this?
So we filed a court application challenging that decision. We're also challenging the criteria under which the city made the decision, because of course in their criteria, they grant themselves the right to cancel anything they unilaterally consider to be polarizing. Of course, we don't know what polarizing means. There's no definition of that, and it could mean anything under the sun. And of course, as any astute observer will see, any number of things can be polarizing. Right? Anytime you have a topic on which there's some disagreement, and that's most topics in the world, you're going to have some polarization because you're going to have some people that agree with it and some people that oppose it. So we filed a court application challenging that as an infringement of free speech, right? Because the government, as they got this bridge, they have lights, and the public is able to ask that the bridge be lit up in their color, right? So that's a form of expression, kind of a strange one. There's no words involved, right? It's just colors. But there's still expressive content. There's meaning there, right? When the bridge is lit up for orange and blue, everybody knows it's for the Oilers. There's meaning in those colors, right? So there's meaning when the bridge is lit up for what people want it to be lit up for, which means that that space, that bridge, is actually constitutionally protected, right? So the government cannot censor what colors go on that bridge based on the content, unless there's a good reason for it, right? So we say what the city of Edmonton has done is they've infringed the free speech rights of the March for Life, and so we're going to be seeking a declaration from the court that decision is null and void because it's unconstitutional, right? It's a breach of free expression.
James Kitchen, lawyer for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Thanks for joining me today from Flames Country, Calgary.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.